So
Oh,
everyone, welcome back to the Northeast On League podcast. Bit of a different setup today, but we're online on Zoom, and we've got Mark Carruthers joining us. So thanks for jumping on, Mark.
thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Good, good. So kind of talk us through how you first got into commentating on or covering like the non-league football in the Northeast. How did you first get into it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going back a good few years now, but I didn't sort of go through the traditional route of going through uni and such like. I was basically blogging, not necessarily writing about non-league. There was elements of non-league in it, but it was just sort of blogging and writing about football whenever I could and whatever I could write about. And then there was a press officer role came up at Blyth Spartans on a voluntary basis. So went down or went up, sorry, to Croft Park, had a chat with Phil Castillo, who was media manager at the time, and the chairman as well, Tony Platten, and kind of got into it that way. And then 2014 they had a good cup run, got to the third round of the FA Cup, beat Hartlepool uh, on Match of the Day. It was live on Match of the Day, and then uh, played Birmingham in the third round, and it kind of brought me into contact with loads of kind of national journalists who write for the national papers for the kind of covering Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, and such like. But obviously, they were taking an interest in Spartans and kind of learnt a lot from them. And then from there, there was a got my first sort of full time media role with nonleaguedaily.com as their editor, and then kind of snowballed from there. Got an opportunity to work on a TV show on Football Matters on the old Maiden Tyne and Wear channel, um, and then got given a chance to take on the Chronicle Journal and Sunday Sun's non-league coverage. So, and then because I was freelance, could work for the non-league paper, could work for, uh, again, took over the non-league coverage for the Sunderland Echo, Hartlepool Mail and Shield Gazette. So, yeah, it's been a long and winding road, but an enjoyable one.
Hmm. And how's it kind of changed over time, like the non-league scene?
Yeah, I think there's been massive changes. I mean, the biggest one is when I first started out that, you know, promotion from the Northern League wasn't compulsory. So a lot of clubs, if they won the Northern League, sort of just stood where they were instead of sort of taking promotion and reaching the heights that you see, your Darlingtons, your Hebburns now at. That was a big change, but also just I think as well there's possibly a lot more interest in non-league football now from, the likes of yourselves. Obviously, what you guys do is brilliant, and I think going back then, maybe sort of students want to get into journalism maybe would have looked more at the big three in the northeast, whereas I think non-league is now seen as a viable option of something to cover, which is great. I know I've dealt with a lot of students who helped me with some of the coverage, and they've been brilliant and really throw themselves into it. So the other side of it is, and I'm kind of going a bit broader here, but I think the when you look at the impact social media has had on the non-league game, the rise of it, the way clubs are embracing it more now, um, it's been a really interesting sort of 10, 15 years where the non-league game seems to have one of its highest profiles ever. People love going. Again, kind of being more general, when you look at the Northeast in particular, there are more clubs at the top end of non-league now. Traditionally it was maybe just Gateshead or Hartlepool when they've kind of flitted in and out of non-league. Whereas you look now, you've got South Shields, you've got Spennymoor, you've got Darlington in the National League North. Hopefully, South Shields this weekend will go into the National League. You've got Hebburn joining them in the National League North, if not. So it's really interesting the way, traditionally the Northern League was a real powerhouse, and obviously the Vars wins that they had. But now, when you look at the top end of non-league football, the National League North, the Northern Premier League, Premier and East, there's definitely more representation in there from the Northeast, which in my view is how it should have been all along.
Mhm.
I just want to quickly touch on like you mentioned about social media there, and I noticed you do quite a lot of short form video now for like Twitter and TikTok. What was sort of like the inspiration, like idea behind that?
Demands of media, the fact that we are moving towards more video content now. I mean, look, there'll always be a place for written, and rightly so, because that's what we do as journalists. I mean, the amount of words I've written this season, I'd hate to think what it is, covering everything I've done across a number of outlets. But I think there is also a demand and a want for video. I mean, you look at stuff like TikTok and I've started. I always promised myself I wouldn't go into TikTok during COVID because of it was a place that I don't mind saying I was a bit ignorant to, and maybe thought was where people just did stupid dances and stuff, and that's not really me. But there is a market for it, there is a need for it, and a demand where people want instant reaction from games. They want to see behind the scenes at clubs, and if it's on your phone and you've done it anyway, then why wouldn't you put it out on Instagram, or why wouldn't you think about doing live on Instagram, or putting it out on what I'm still going to call Twitter, by the way. So yeah, I think it's just it's something I've always been comfortable doing. I've always been comfortable doing working on a camera, whether it's a phone or a camera itself, a TV camera. But I think it is the way the industry's going. People want to see video. Look at how many, even when you write a piece and it goes online, generally there'll be a video embedded in it, and we know
Yeah.
why that is. It's to obviously help with sort of Google requirements or whatever it may be. But I just think it's the way we're going, and the more comfortable you can get in front of a camera and kind of look for different as I say, like the other week I did one where I was in South Shields change room, or just outside the change room before the playoff semi-final, I think it was, and then sort of did something walking out onto the ground and onto the pitch and stuff, and it's just given it something a little bit different. I realize I'm very fortunate to have access like that and have the trust of clubs to do stuff like that. So I just think it's nice to give people a bit of an insight. I enjoy it. I've got to be honest. I think it's just
Yeah.
something a little bit different.
Will, do you want to move on to the sort of season review that we're planning on
Yeah, we
doing?
can do. Yeah. So Mark, we've kind of like last night we were thinking of like segments, and we're thinking of like grading all the seasons of like Hartlepool, Spennymoor, Gateshead, Darlington, and South Shields.
Yeah.
Obviously you cover South Shields and Gateshead in quite like depth, don't you? Really. So what do you think of their seasons basically?
Well, Gateshead's. I mean, let's be honest. If you're judging that, you've got to kind of do it in two halves. I mean,
Yeah.
you look from August to say, well, August to December, really, isn't it? Late December, and it was really difficult because when I look at Gateshead, you knew this season was going to be a challenge. They had a massive fallout last summer with after the kind of failed takeover that happened, and various people, key figures within the club leaving for their own reasons. Obviously, some went on to the EFL. You look at sort of Luke Clark, head of recruitment, was massive for Gateshead, and he's now done an unbelievable job at Bromley as well. After and played a big part in their success this season in League Two. Um, and it was always going to be a little bit of a struggle this season. There were some promising performances and results early on. I mean, going to AFC Wimbledon and winning the FA Cup was just incredible. But then to go on that long run without a win, I'd probably be sat here and saying it would be an F
Yeah.
for the season. But then you look at what's happened second half, and I know there's a tendency externally to sort of say, well, Alan Armstrong didn't do this, this, and this. But you look at some of the key players through the second half of the season. Fenton John's a great example who Alan has used brilliantly in the first half of the season, given that experience. Then he's played a massive part in helping Gateshead stay up. So I think I don't want the history to be unfair on Alan Armstrong. I think he did everything he could at the time with the funds that he had to try and kind of build something at Gateshead. And then Rob Elliott and Louis Story have come in, and what's happened. Not immediately, by the way. We should point out there was a sort of 6 week period where they were sort of betting in players and trying to get them playing how they wanted. But then to go to Halifax and to get a win, Gateshead, I don't think they've won a game in Halifax since 2000 or the early 2000s at least. And then to do what they did back end of the season, you're sort of looking at it thinking, well, that's an A plus really, because I think us three can sit here and say we thought they were done,
Yeah.
absolutely done.
Yeah.
But somehow they've done it, and somehow. So I don't know how you work that out. I mean, somewhere around a B minus, I guess,
Yeah.
as an average, possibly. Um, but the true test of how good the season has been will be come August. How are Gateshead looking going into the new season, because they've got foundations in place. A lot of the players that came in are on 18-month deals at very least. So can they build on that foundation and kick on? So I'd say, yeah, around a B minus, we'll say.
Mhm. how do you think they'll like fare with? Obviously, they've got that new American. Well, he's not American, but he's from America. He's got the what's it? Next Level Soccer, the football academy in Arizona. Do you think he'll prove like vital
Yeah,
next season?
it's an interesting one because I don't think anyone should think he's just going to come in and lump a load of, millions upon Gateshead and all of a sudden they're going to be, the next Wrexham or whatever. This is a very different story. This is, um, although I've got no doubt there will be some investment, I think this is more about trying to solidify Gateshead's infrastructure and make sure that they don't fall back into where they were, 8 months ago now, 7, 8 months ago. It's more sort of about connections and making sure that there are people in and around the club that have knowledge of the game. Stephen is he's from Hartlepool, was born in Hartlepool, brought up in Hartlepool, and has his business in America, as you say. So it's not as if he's blind to what North East football is about. He knows only too well because of his love for Hartlepool and such like. But the big thing I took from it was his attraction to Gateshead was because of the community aspect. And I think possibly in the last 12 months, there has been a little bit of a widening of the gap between Gateshead Football Club and the community. And I think what you saw in the last 2 to 3 months of the season was that gap being bridged slowly but surely. Where towards the end of the season, I mean, I never thought I'd see a day when Gateshead took, 700, 800 fans to Carlisle United. It was incredible. The last home games, there was good crowds there. Thousands were there. So there is that side of it as well. The thing here, the big figure for me is Rob Elliott. I think Rob is the catalyst for what can be a bigger and better Gateshead Football Club. I've got no doubt he will stay. I've got a piece coming out next week via the Chronicle looking at the kind of great escape. I wanted to wait until we knew who was going to be in the league next season because he references clubs that may well be in the league next season. Um, so it's going to be really interesting next season for Gateshead. They've got a big summer. I've got no doubt they'll lose players. I will say that. I think there will be a couple of maybe high-profile players go because this is how Gateshead function. But at the same time, I have absolute confidence they will replace them with players we've probably never even heard of who will come in and be unbelievable successes.
I don't want to start rumors as well, but do you think like a return for Greg Ollie could be on the cards? Obviously, it looks like he's probably going to leave York this summer.
Can I be honest? And for Greg, I hope not, because I would love nothing better than for Greg Ollie to be a Football League player.
Mhm.
Because what that guy's done, and I got to know Greg really, really well during his time at Gateshead, and having sort of covered him at Newcastle as well with the 21s or the reserves or whatever it was classed as back then. Now, Greg's story is a fascinating one because got released by Newcastle he basically come out on the wrong end of a 50-50 decision, which was such a shame. Now, that's not me saying Greg would have made it in the Premier League. I'm not trying to say that, but I think he would have had a very, very good Football League career. He's gone to Hull, played alongside Andy Robertson, played alongside Harry Maguire. And again, things just didn't work out. Hull was a bit of a basket case club at the time. It's still not too much better now, I guess. Um, and then sort of fell into non-league with Gateshead. And what he's done for that club, sticking around when they almost went under and when they were forcibly relegated into the National League North and captaining them to get back, to go to Wembley, to come through an ACL injury, to win the FA Trophy with them, then suffer what really, if I'm honest, should have been a career-ending injury, to come back and sort of to go on to do what he's done with York City is incredible. And there aren't too many more special people, and I mean people here, not players, people than Greg Ollie that have been connected with Gateshead Football Club. I'll say that. So I hope he doesn't leave. I hope he stays. I hope he gets Football League appearances with York City because there aren't too many people in football who are more deserving of a chance in the EFL than Greg Ollie.
Yeah,
Moving on.
I went similar to like your season. I've also rated like Gators season a B. I've sort of split it into like two sort of seasons. Do you want to move on to talk about a bit about Hartlepool's season?
Yeah, we can do. I've given them a C just because of like just kind of inconsistency, I guess.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I think, look, they obviously got off to a pretty solid start under Simon Grayson. And then it sort of tailed off. Obviously, he departed and Nicky's come in or gone in. And initially has overseen a really good run of form. Obviously, at that time they were in and around the playoffs, and they've kind of stayed, barring a little slide to mid-table, they've sort of stayed in and around the playoffs until the very last weeks of the season, when obviously it was confirmed Nicky Featherstone will be leaving the club. Which um, I'm fascinated by the talk that he may stay in and around the club, because I'm not sure how healthy that'll be for the next manager, that his predecessor has still got a role at the club. I think Nicky, for me, it feels as if Nicky Featherstone isn't completely convinced by that either, by the way, because I saw there was an interview he did, I think with, it may well have been with the club website, or it may have been with BBC Radio Tees, where he spoke about whatever role it is has to be right for all parties, and those parties include whoever the incoming manager should be. So I think it may be best for all parties if Nicky goes off and finds a job elsewhere, and kind of kickstarts his managerial career elsewhere. He's done a pretty solid job, I think. I think C minus is probably around right. I think maybe there were some games where, if the results had gone slightly differently, they would have been firmly in the playoff race going into the last week of the season. But obviously, it hasn't happened. The demolition down at Wheelstone has just killed it, I think. That came out of nowhere, didn't it? I remember thinking about it at that game, that because Wheelstone had been through an FA Trophy semi-final on the Saturday, and maybe they'd be hangover, and then I was at a game that night, and you're sort of looking at your phone, seeing what the score is, and look, half an hour in, that the 6-0 down, I think it was at the time, or 4-0. So yeah, it's a season that could have offered more and probably should have offered more. So yeah, I think the C minus would be probably around right. Yeah.
They've opted for like big changes as well, haven't they, with the return list? Obviously, they've kept that like key core group of players, like Coogan, Miley, and Sherman's under contract, McNally. But obviously, it's going to be a full summer of rebuild, isn't it?
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes as well. There's the Bromby and partners coming in and kind of having a massive overhaul of football operations, and they've spent the last 2 3 months, whatever it is now, feels like forever, just analysing what's going on behind the scenes. And Nicky stepping away was part of that. Nicky Featherstone said that the retained list, as the club said themselves, was part of that. Got a lot of work to do in the summer. I mean, you're looking at, you know, there's still not deals agreed with 3 or 4 other players either. So you could be looking at Hartlepool having to recruit well into double figures. You could be looking at sort of 14, 15 new players having to come in, which I think um, moved away from non-league slightly. Obviously, Sunderland have done something similar last summer. It's not always easy to embed a new squad like that, particularly not in a division like the National League. So yeah, I'm fascinated by who comes in. I've got to be honest. I'm not massively sure who will take that job, but they've got a lot of work to do. And I'm also fascinated by the fact it's being referenced as head coach, because that makes me wonder if there is going to be someone leading recruitment, and how much of a say the head coach has in terms of who comes in. So it's a fascinating sort of pre-season, probably more so than any other club, by the way, in the Northeast non-league system. Hartlepool have got a fascinating pre-season ahead of them.
Yeah, it's quite interesting with Bromby and partners because obviously Joe Monks has recently left as well. It does just feel like at the minute that Chris Maxwell's just in charge of like the whole football operation at the club, doesn't it? But like, when does
Yeah,
that end?
well, I think the question will be, does it?
Yeah.
Does it end? Does he stay in charge? I don't know. Again, I guess this will come from the review. Who's leading recruitment? The thing with pools is, and I find this all the time, there's always questions. There's always something to answer with pools. And they're a massive club, and I keep saying this, they're a football league club in everything but status. Everything at that club should scream of League Two, pushing League One. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when they were in League One, and they came within minutes of a place in the Championship, which would have been incredible. Um, but I fear for them a little bit at the moment, because it feels as if there is so much work to do, and there are so many questions to answer. Who is going to lead recruitment? When is the new manager going to be appointed? When are they going to start kickstarting bringing players in? Because it needs to start pretty soon, I think.
Do you want to move on to South Shields?
Yeah, we can do. I've given them an A just because of obviously they've kept at it right for most of the season. Obviously, just fallen short at the end with Fylde beating them to it. How do you kind of assess their season? Obviously, you've covered them in depth, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think with South Shields, the big one with them is, and I say this all the time, and this isn't me giving Ian Watson a get out here. We're recording this 48 hours before they play the playoff final
Mm.
against Kidderminster Harriers. What I will say is, if you go back 12 months, South Shields had just finished in the bottom eight of the division. They hadn't won a game, I think, in the last 7 or 8 games of the season. They've been comfortably beaten at Marine on the last day of the season, and to be where they are now, after a new management team coming in, after not far short of an entire squad being recruited. I just think it's incredible to finish second, to still go into the last day of the regular season with a chance of winning the title. Now, what I will say, I'm not saying South Shields have got a small budget, far from it, but Fylde have got a very, very, very strong budget with a very, very wealthy owner. So to go into the last day of the season with a chance of still winning the title is unbelievable. And let's be honest, they finished comfortably ahead of third place, which ironically will be the team they'll face on Saturday. Now, I absolutely agree with the A. I think if they won the title, it would be an absolute A plus, A star, whatever you call it. But Saturday could go either way. It really could. I mean, Kidderminster, yes, they finished quite a far distance behind South Shields in the season, but they also beat them twice, and they were the only club in the league to do that. I think Ian, Carl Magnay, Mike Williamson, and the other backroom staff that are at the club have done an incredible job. Um, the style of football they play is very, very attractive to watch. I think they've reignited something within South Shields Football Club that had maybe dwindled to a degree in recent seasons. And no matter what happens on Saturday, the club will be an infinitely better place going into this summer than it was last summer.
How do you assess that game kind of going? Obviously, I think Kidderminster are coming into it on the back of what, 5 wins in a row? Obviously, they've beaten Shields recently. They'll be tough
Yeah.
on it.
Oh, well, absolutely. As I said, they're the only team that did the double over them in the league season. What I would say is, I think if you had a coin on you, toss that coin and whichever
Goes
side
on.
it comes out on. I don't think it's. I've had Kidderminster fans at me on social media saying that Shields are favourites because of where they finished in the league. I've had Shields fans at me saying no, Kidderminster are favourites because they beat us twice. The reality is, it's probably somewhere in the middle where there's nothing between them. The game will be decided by who comes out on the right end of big moments. I realise that's a really boring answer. I can't call it. I really can't call it. And as much as it is my job to do that, and I will probably ahead of kickoff make a judgment, I'm just not sure. I really are. You'd like to say South Shields at home should be favourites, narrow favourites, but I think you guys will have seen enough playoff games at several levels, whether it's EFL or non-league, to know that they are just the craziest games of football where anything can happen. So I'm going there Saturday morning, just expecting the unexpected. Simple as that.
Obviously, recently, South Shields, I think it was around the end of March time, they announced they've got like new investment coming in. But obviously, Jeff Thompson staying on as chairman. Like, how big do you think that is for the club that he's staying on?
I think with this investment, which obviously we're waiting news on it being officially green lighted, I don't think that's too far away, if I'm honest, because it is coming kind of from an international source. I think there is an absolute need for a connection with the local community, and Jeff presents that. You look at what he's done over the last sort of 10, 11 years, the way the club has been advanced from second division of the Northern League to where they are now, potentially going into next season, one promotion away from the EFL. It's incredible. It's such an amazing rise. And we shouldn't forget that the hard work that went on in the early days. I always say this about South Shields. People like John King, who was manager at the time when Jeff came in, who got them their first promotion. And then people afterwards, your Lee Pictons, your Graham Fentons, people like that. They all played a part, and some of the players back then as well, who should rightly go down as club legends, because without them, the club isn't where it is now. And it's been an incredible ride, and one that I think, with this investment coming in, and one that is far from over. And I think when you look at our clubs, should South Shields get up this weekend, I think there's a very strong argument to say that they are potentially in the best place possible out of all of our clubs to become what we hope will be our second EFL club after Middlesbrough, which is quite sad in a way, isn't it? But I think looking at the plans there, things I've been told, it's a very exciting time for South Shields.
How do you think, like, say if the worst came to the worst and they didn't get promoted, how do you think they'd go about next season? Do you think it would be like immediate bounce back, or how do you think it would go?
There'd be no change. They're very much process driven. Ian Watson was always keen on that at Gateshead when he was there with Mike. They're always process driven. So no matter what happens Saturday, they will stick to the process. They will stick to the recruitment that they've done. They will have targets that they will feel can get them promoted next season, or if they do get up, can help them thrive in the National League. So yeah, I don't think the success or failure of South Shields season depends on Saturday. I think it's been a success regardless because of how far they've progressed. Um, Nothing will change. They will still go about their business exactly the same way. And I think, if anything, they'll come through it stronger if they do come out in the wrong end on Saturday.
Do you think they potentially could lose players in the summer? I mean, obviously they have the National League North Golden Boot winner up front. Like there probably is going to be interest from higher up, isn't there?
There already has been in recent seasons. Paul Blackett has been the subject of interest from elsewhere. I think inevitably they will lose players. That's kind of how football works. And one of the things, if I can just go back to Gateshead, one of the things I like about Gateshead is they are fully aware of where they sit in the football food chain. They know that if a football league club comes along and offers a deal to a player or puts a bid in for a player, they are not in a position to kind of reject that bid. They will accept it. They will then look at how can we replace this player effectively and kind of go again. And I think South Shields, for all the investment they will have and for all the ambition they will have, if an offer came in from a League One club for one of the better players, they're probably not going to be in a position, not even professionally, but as human beings, to say to that player, no, you've got to stay with us when they could be moving into League One. That's not me saying they have got interest, by the way,
Yeah.
but it's kind of hypothetical. So I think, yes, there will be interest. Yes, they will lose players. One thing they have done, they've got someone like Will Jenkins tied down to a long deal, which is a big positive. Everyone knows what I think of Will. I think for me, he's the best midfielder in North East non-league football. I've never shied away from saying that. Blackhead, I think I may be wrong, has another year on his deal. And at his age as well, and I'm not saying he's old, by the way, he's certainly not as old as I am, but as a footballer, he is sort of heading towards that now or never moment. Um, would a football league club offer him a deal at the age he's at? I think he's 27, 28 now. Maybe that time has passed,
Mhm.
maybe, or it is approaching that time will be past. Maybe he feels comfortable. Maybe he feels comfortable at South Shields. I think this is the thing we always look at. Players, more so in recent seasons, I think, are happy to stay where they are because of how comfortable they are. So he enjoys it there. He's playing with people he loves. He's playing under a management team that trust him. This isn't me saying he's 100% going to stay, but if I was going to put money on it, I think he will be there next season, no matter what division they're in.
Mhm.
Should we move on to Darlington and Spennymoor?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Spennymoor, I've given them a B. I think obviously they had the times under Graham Lee was a bit inconsistent, wasn't it, towards like the start of the season and the middle of the season. Obviously Tommy Miller's come in, he's kind of he's guided them to 10th place. I think when Graham Lee was sacked, there were 8 points from the playoffs, and now they're five with the season finishing. So I think he's improved them slightly, hasn't he? Really, obviously he's got the job on a permanent basis going into next season. So how do you kind of assess their season, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really strange one because I think, and I'm fairly certain Spennymo would refute this, but I think there was possibly a little bit of a hangover from the FA Trophy final. Um, I think Graham Lee is one of the very, very best people in football. Every dealing I've had with him, he's just an incredible human being. One of the most genuine managers I've ever dealt with, and someone who I think did very, very well at Spennymoor. I got why he left the club 100%. It did feel as if the time was right for a change. But I think he should be proud of everything he did. Getting them to the first round of the FA Cup is no small achievement. Getting to the FA Trophy final certainly isn't, given the run that they had. And I think he did a very, very solid job. But I understand his ambitions at Spennymoor Town. I understand where they want to go. and what they want to do as a football club. I think Tommy Miller is another great guy. I spoke to Tommy at length last week. I spoke to him at length, in kind of recent months. Um, and just a very, very good appointment. Someone that knows the club, someone that has learned from his first spell at the club when he was in charge there, and obviously worked under Jason Ainsley, and there aren't too many bigger names in the history of spending more time than Jason Ainsley. So gets what the fans want, gets what they need. You've got Matty Dolan working under him. I think there's an assistant manager coming in as well. So it's a really exciting time for Spenny. Um, Big summer ahead. I think there'll be some big changes, some big calls to make. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go. I would say probably around a B minus for me, somewhere in between a C and a B. Probably, I think you look at that inconsistency across the season has kind of cost them in the end. They should have, even in the last few weeks of the season, you think a couple more wins, they would have been in the playoff picture firmly and probably been in the playoffs. And I think that's just that inconsistency's hampered them a bit. But yeah, I think they've got another club with a huge summer, and it's going to be fascinating to see. But they couldn't have a better man in charge than Tommy Miller, with Matty helping them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've gone for a C. I was like a little bit worried for them at one point because of the change manager. I think it was around the February time, which I think is always like a difficult time to like change managers. And I think you had like one or two early results which weren't brilliant. And I thought at that point, like, oh, could they possibly have, a bit of a slide down the tail? But they've ended up having a pretty decent second half of the season, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think it's always difficult when you change manager at that point of the season because the die's kind of been cast for the season for a number of clubs. Whereas with Spenny, it was kind of you thought it was drifting towards a mid-table finish, which in the circumstances I don't think would have been a bad thing.
Mm.
But the fact that they've built up a bit of momentum during the final weeks of the season under Tommy and Matty, I think has given them momentum to take into the summer. So they're kind of attacking the summer now on the front foot rather than being forced into maybe too many changes that they don't really need. So it's going to be really fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. Obviously, Rob Ramshaw and Glenn Taylor, I think, are out of contract now, who are two massive parts of that football club, not just on field, but off field as well. Um, Hopefully, they get tied down because I can't imagine watching a Spennymoor Town side without those two in it. It'll kind of be a little bit disappointing as well, I think, for the fans. So, yeah, fingers crossed. But what I love about Spenny is the off-field stuff. I think they are starting to progress off the field and grow off the field as well. Now you look at the attendances; they've gone up. Um, there's a real loyal fan base there, so I'm just fascinated to see where they go from this point onwards.
How difficult do you think it is, like in the National League North now, to be a part-time team? Because it's increasingly becoming a full-time league, isn't it?
Well, if you look one level above, and I always say this, it's not really the National League anymore. It's now
No.
League Three. It's effectively League Three. Let's be honest. I think are the two, possibly three part-time clubs in the National League. You look in the National League North, there are a number of full-time clubs. However, it is now predominantly either part-time or kind of a hybrid. Some clubs are hybrid models. I wouldn't be shocked if it does move towards more clubs being hybrid models in the next few years, by the way. I think there are ambitious clubs coming up the pyramid who want to move in that direction. There is no doubt it is difficult, and I think particularly in the Northeast, because when you look at how things have gone across the whole pyramid in the Northeast, you now have clubs in the Northern Premier League Premier. You've got, I think there's 8 next season, potentially 9 in the Northern Premier League East. There's only so many players
Mhm.
can go around. So Spenny and Darlington as well, I'll throw them in, are probably not in a bad position where they're the top of the tree. So they can, you know, entice the kind of the better players to their clubs. But you've got Heaven in the mix now in the National League North, which is going to be fascinating. I can't wait to see where they go this summer. Obviously, I don't know if we are going to discuss them. I dare say we will, but they've made some big calls early, which is interesting. Um, so yeah, it is difficult. I think when you look at the some of the journeys in the National League North as well, when you're a part-time player, people talk about the Saturday, traveling down to say Merthyr on a Saturday or traveling down to Kings Lynn on a Saturday, or yeah, but it's a Saturday. And it's like, well, it is, but they've still had like a full week of work and probably trained twice, and then they're traveling all the way down to wherever it may be. So it is difficult. It really is. But I would love to think Spenny and Darlow are trying to progress towards kind of becoming a hybrid model at some point.
Yeah.
That's not me saying they will, but I think there is potential for both clubs to do that.
Should we talk about Darlington? I've given them a B plus. I think obviously their season's kind of petered out towards the end. It kind of like fell through almost. Obviously they had a good middle where they kind of like sustained the playoff push. Started poorly, like finished kind of poorly as well. It was just kind of unfortunate, really. They kind of fell away in the last few games.
Yeah, I think the kind of continuous improvement under Steve Watson and Terry Mitchell has just continued this season, really. I mean, I remember when they came in, they were well on their way to relegation. I think nobody doubted that. You look at, again, I remember when they were appointed New Year's Eve, I'd turn my laptop off, I was ready to get a few drinks and celebrate with the family. And then you get a phone call saying Steve's coming in and Terry's coming in and, sort of been enthused by that as well, because having seen Steve's work at Gateshead and kind of what he'd done at York and Chester, he knew the league, he knew the area, obviously being from up here, and it felt like a really solid appointment. And you can't underestimate Terry Mitchell's role either, a brilliant coach and a brilliant person as well, so knowledgeable and enthusiastic. So, yeah, you look at the players they've brought in, Darlington will always at the moment be a danger of losing players to higher levels. But they've recruited superbly well. Will McGowan coming in on loan from Gateshead's been a great signing. I really love Jack Maskell as a striker. Obviously, did well at Horden, did brilliantly at Dunston, and has gone to Darlington and done very well after sort of adjusting to the league. So, with Darlington, it'll always be about what's next. It'll always be about can they take that next step, and that next step is can they become a genuine playoff contender. Can they become a side that pushes for promotion? And that's why this summer is huge for them. But I love Steve. I think he's a brilliant guy. I think he's a brilliant manager. And I've got no doubt they will improve next season and they will challenge for the playoffs. I think the big thing at Darlington as well is they need the stadium sorted. They need to get their own stadium. They need to get their own home that isn't Blackwell Meadows. It served its purpose. But I think if Darlington wants to truly grow to become an AFL club once again at some point in the future, they need to get towards that. And I know they are working hard and working consistently to try and get that done.
Obviously, one big job they've got this summer is to replace the goals of Cedric May, who looks like he's all but off. Do you think it'll be a case of trying to find a like for like striker, or do you think maybe Maskell maybe like he'll have to step up and become the goal scorer, and maybe they bring in some like a different type of player?
Well, if it was me, I would be sort of throwing down the gauntlet to Jack Maskell and saying, "Can you step up? Can you become that 20 goal a season striker that we need?" They will have to bring someone in more so for squad depth. Obviously, they've got Aidan Rutledge there as well, but I think they probably will have to bring someone in who's a little bit different and maybe more in the Cedric mold of pacey, tricky, non-stop work rate. Um, can get in behind, can finish. So they may need to look to do that. Who that is, I don't know. Strikers are a rare breed these days, aren't they? Nobody seems to like to play with strikers. But I think, yeah, you're probably right. They will need to bring someone in. But I would love to see Maskell really step up and become that kind of you can depend on me to get those goals and lead the line as effectively as I know he can.
I'm just going to throw out a name here, but do you think a return for Adam Campbell could be on the cards?
Yeah, I mean, Adam obviously has been let go by Hartlepool. It didn't quite work out from there, and I know he took a little bit of stick earlier in the season, but I will say I don't think Hartlepool fans saw anything like the Adam Campbell that Adam Campbell can be.
Mhm.
So it's going to be a really, really interesting summer for Adam as to where he goes. I know he's got interest, 100% know he's got interest. I spoke to him last week, and there are clubs he's going to be talking to. Um, yeah, you wouldn't rule it out. You wouldn't rule it out. I know Adam will want to play at the highest level possible. Darlington can offer that. So it'll be fascinating to see if they will try and make a move for him. Obviously, had a great spell under Alan Armstrong there.
Yeah.
The club he knows well. And look, Maskell and Campbell sounds like a really good partnership that should work together. So, yeah, it's a possibility. I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, I'm a Hartlepool fan, you see, and we've seen like Campbell. I feel like because they've had so many managers with different styles of play, it sort of just hadn't sort of clicked for him. But like, it does feel like there's a good player in there. It's just not we're not seeing the best out of him.
Look, I saw Adam in his time at Gateshead, and he was comfortably one of their better players.
Mhm.
And the forward line they had when they won the National League North title of Macaulay Langstaff, Aaron Campbell, and Kedwin Scott was as good as I've seen in North East non-league football. And Adam, even though the other two um, maybe got more goals, Adam was huge. The amount of assists that he got in that season, the amount of key goals that he scored, he was huge. And obviously he's gone to Crawley. He's done all right when he was there. Um, and it just for whatever reason hasn't worked out at Hartlepool. Now I don't think that's down to Adam Campbell as a person or a player. I think it's just there's been that many changes at the club and that many different styles. He just hasn't been able to get settle into a rhythm. And he's always been the sort of player who, once he gets into a rhythm, he is one of the best players we probably have in the Northeast non-league scene. And you look at what he's done in his career, what he's done higher levels. But for whatever reason, just hasn't happened at Hartlepool. But he's an intriguing option for someone.
Do we want to just quickly touch on Heaven's season, like how you've rated their season?
Yeah, I mean, look, how on earth do you assess this season? I don't think there's enough stars you could put on the end of an A star for Heaven. I just, I thought mid-table would be an achievement. I really did. After last season, the second half of last season, when they were really struggling and, you know, had a terrible second half of the season, admittedly with injuries and suspensions and unavailability and such like, and finished what were the bottom eight, bottom seven, eight of the table. I think they finished. Didn't really secure the NPL Premier status until the final weeks of the season. Now, if you'd said to me they would even go into the last few weeks of the season in and around the playoffs, I would have laughed at you. To win the title, to see off Hensford Town and to see off FC United of Manchester and so many other clubs with bigger budgets, it's just an incredible story. You know what? We talk about South Shields' rise a lot. Hebben have done it in a shorter space of time.
Mhm.
Incredible. It really is. And obviously, I cover them heavily for the Shields Gazette. And I, I'm always wary of, and it will happen this weekend, where we fully focus on South Shields because they've got a playoff final. But I'm always wary of going too far when Hebben have just had this unbelievable achievement. And obviously, last year of the season, because I can't be in two places at once, I was left with this: do you go to South Shields at Kidderminster, where they could win the title, or do you stay with Hebben, who are at home in a winnable home game against Russell Olympic, knowing if they win, they've won the title? So, in the end, made the right choice, thankfully, of staying with Hebben. And the scenes that day will live with me for a long time. And I've seen a lot of Northeast clubs win things, whether at Wembley, whether it's league titles. But that day at Hebben, seeing the joy on the faces, seeing the tears in some people's eyes, just an incredible day. Look, next season is going to be tough, really tough. They know that. Nobody needs to tell them that. But they've got players more than capable of playing at that level. And I've got no doubt they'll bring in players who will help them at that level. So, yeah, fascinating. I keep saying this, a fascinating summer ahead at Hebben. They've just let Gary Martin go, the top goal scorer. I think that was more travel issues with Gary. Ollie Martin has gone, who's been there for a long time. Obviously, a Hebben lad, scored the winning goal in the FA Vars final in 2021. Has been there throughout all this rise. That's a little bit of a sad one for me. I'm not going to lie. I think Ollie, as much as he hasn't maybe played as much as he would have liked in recent weeks, what he's done for the club, the big moments that he's produced, it's kind of sad to see him go. But they'll have a right good go next season. Some brilliant plans on and off the pitch.
So you think they'll do well next season?
Depends what you define as doing well. For me, doing well next season would be staying in the National League North. And that's not me trying to limit any ambitions or anything at Hebben Town. I just think it's being realistic. If they stay in at that level, they'll have done incredibly well. What I would love to see is the local town, the local community get behind them so they have crowds of something approaching four figures every week, because the atmosphere at that last game of the season was incredible. absolutely incredible. And I think I may be right or maybe wrong in saying sort of five of the last six home games had crowds above 600, I think, which is brilliant. And I think that needs to continue. They've got a brilliant youth system there, one of the biggest junior setups in the region. All those youngsters can get along to games with their families. Heaven Town will just grow and grow. And you've seen the plans that are being given the green light now for the new stand, for all the new facilities. That is a club on the up. And next season, if they stay in that division, with that coming, Heaven can be a real force going forwards.
Would you say most of like the teams we talked about today are like in a good position going forwards? Obviously, Gateshead have had the new like obviously investor. Hartlepool have been taken over. Heaven have obviously just been promoted. Would you say they're all in good positions?
It feels that way, doesn't it? We feel in pretty good health in the top two levels. Heaven, to a degree, is kind of a wait and see because we don't know how they're going to cope in the National League North. But at the same time, um, if you'd said they were in the National League North 12 months ago, you would have just sort of shrugged and laughed probably. But the interesting one's Hartlepool, isn't it? And I'm always, when a new investor or a new owner comes in, I'm always very much sort of, it's not words, it's actions. I've always been that no matter what level. You can speak and speak and speak, say all the statements or release all the statements and say all the words you want, but until you're doing something, um, and putting together something on the pitch and something behind the scenes with actions, you're proving nothing yet. So I think Pools is a really interesting one. But yeah, I think certainly the rest of them are in a pretty good place. They do have work to do this summer, though, I think, across the board.
Mhm.
One thing I want to quickly ask about, because it could potentially affect Hartlepool and South Shields next season if they get promoted, is the three up, three down campaign.
Yeah.
How much do you think that's needed in non-league?
I think it's essential. I think there needs to be more fluidity between various levels of the pyramid. I did see some nonsense comments about that should be three up, three down from the National League North and National League South into the National League, which is ridiculous because then you'd have to relegate six, which is never going to happen. But yeah, I think in terms of EFL League Two to the National League, absolutely need to be three up, three down. I think you look at the clubs that have progressed from the National League in recent seasons and have gone on to then go into League One or firmly establish themselves as real threats in League Two kind of tells you there needs to be more. And I think it helps the EFL as much as it helps the National League because the EFL can then become more attainable and more clubs are going to push and push and push. Do I think it'll happen? I'm very much on the fence on that one because you kind of, it's the phrase sort of turkeys voting for Christmas, isn't it, really? Because you're looking at EFL clubs voting for essentially more jeopardy to be relegated into the National League. On the other side of that, what I would say is I don't think relegation in the National League is now what it used to be because it used to be where clubs would go to, just wither away and sort of go into the background and never be seen again. But now it's almost like a rehab thing where clubs come down and are rehabilitated and, regain some strength and then kick on again. So it's going to be interesting. I'm just not convinced it'll happen. I think it should, but I'm very much I'm not sure it will.
Mhm.
Obviously, it can impact teams like financially as well, similar like the Championship to the Premier League, isn't it? Like a lot of teams now in the National League are spending like ridiculous money to try and get in the EFL, but if they miss out because there's only two teams that go up, it could really like send teams like into some financial difficulties, couldn't it?
Yeah, and obviously you always hear talk about this club spends this money, this club has this budget, this club has lost this amount of money this year, and you think, well, until you see it on paper, you never really believe it. But there's no doubt at the top end of that league, there are some monumental budgets, and there will be budgets that are bigger than League Two clubs. I would argue there may be a couple that are bigger than some League One clubs. So that kind of tells you about the challenge that Gateshead, Hartlepool, and South Shields hopefully will be fighting next season. Again, I've no doubt Pools will have a good budget. It'll improve under Landon Smith. I was told a few weeks back that it will increase. Not maybe as much as some people think, but it will increase. Um, South Shields, if they go up with this new investment, you would hope their budget will increase. Gateshead's very much I'm not going to call them paupers because that's not very nice. The sort of underdogs, I guess, of the three, stupidly, because of the budget they have or don't have. yet they find a way of identify. They put their efforts into solid recruitment from lower levels and identifying gems that maybe need a little bit of work before being sold on. That's their model. That's how they work. So it's a little bit different. I think I wrote a piece for the Hartlepool Mail a few weeks back about if South Shields come up, then they present a threat to Hartlepool in a different way that Gateshead possess a threat to Hartlepool. So Gateshead's threat is that they can identify players that I don't even think Hartlepool would consider. Whereas with South Shields, I would argue they'll probably be in the same market as Hartlepool for players. So it's going to be a really interesting season if South Shields get up, obviously, again. It'll be a really interesting season if that does happen. But yeah, I think you look at the budgets at the top end of that division, I think Hartlepool did well to be even in the playoff mix. Because barring maybe your Boreham Woods of this world, who for me have been incredible for a number of years, you'd imagine everyone else in that top 6 or 7 have got a bigger budget than Hartlepool.
Right, everyone, thanks for listening. Obviously, Mark, thanks for jumping on. Lots of good insight there. So thanks for helping and coming on. Cheers.
Thanks for having me.